Hello, my name is James Benton, and I'm the director of the Race and Economic Empowerment Project at the Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor at Georgetown University. On behalf of the Kalmanovitz Initiative, welcome to Intersections of Economic, Political, and Religious Democracy, which is part of the multi-day convening, Constructing a New Social Compact, a public forum on empowering the post-pandemic working class. We invite you to join us for one of the remaining concurrent sessions following this discussion, as well as the closing session later today. We also invite attendees to submit questions through the chat box at the bottom of your screen during the conversation today. Our moderator today is Joerg Rieger, founding director of the Wendland-Cook program in Religion and Justice at the Vanderbilt University Divinity School. Among other appointments, Dr. Rieger is also a distinguished professor of theology and the Cal Turner Chancellor's Chair in Wesleyan Studies at Vanderbilt University. I will now turn it over to Dr. Rieger for introductions of the panelists and commencement of today's discussion.
Thank you so much, James, and good morning, everybody. I believe this session will also be recorded, so we have the track record of it, and I appreciate being able to use this later for the kind of work that we're all doing. Let me welcome the panelists, welcome the attendees. I will be in a minute introducing our panelists. I will also put their information in the chat, so we have that for a reference, including their professional website, so you can actually follow along there as I speak. Let me just see. It looks like the chat is not letting me cut and post as quickly as I want to do that, but there we go. Sorry about that. Anyways, I'll go ahead. I'll go in alphabetical order. Welcome to this panel. Welcome. This is May Day, so we're excited to have a panel on religion and labor on this very special International Day of Labor. And the people, the participants in the panel are all seasoned organizers, academics, people that have thought about this question and not only thought about it, but lived it for a long time. So the first person on my list is Katie Brower. She's the organizing director of Bargaining for the Common Good. She has 12 years of union organizing experience with janitors, nurses, and teachers, and is currently discerning a call to ministry. I believe she's also a student at Union Theological Seminary in New York. Welcome, KB. It's great to have you with us.
Great to be here. Happy May Day.
Yeah, thanks. What a special day. I grew up in Germany, where this is not only a special day, but it's a day of work, as it should be, right, for all working people. And maybe one of these times we'll get this in the United States. Welcome, KB. Our second panelist is Francisco Garcia, who is a PhD student in theological studies, ethics and action at Vanderbilt University in the Graduate Department of Religion. And he's also a graduate research fellow at the Wendland-Cook program in Religion and Justice at Vanderbilt Divinity School. He serves part-time as an assistant chaplain at St. Augustine's Episcopal Chapel in Nashville. As a priest, labor, and community organizer, his work over the last 10 years has centered around congregation-based ministry and interfaith community organizing around immigrant rights, housing rights, and racial and economic justice issue in the greater LA region. Welcome, Francisco.
Thank you, Joerg. It's great to be here. Feliz Día del Trabajador. This is a day where things shut down in many places, you know, to support the dignity of work. Happy to be here with all of you.
As they should. That's right. Let me see here. I want to post something for Chaumtoli Hook in the chat, and it's not letting me. So let me see if I can do this now. There we go. This is working. just want to make sure that we have this information. That's also an introduction to ourselves. Chaumtoli Huck is an associate professor of law at the CUNY School of Law, and she's the founder and editor of an innovative law and media nonprofit, which is focused on law and social justice. It's called Law at the Margins. Her expertise lies in labor and employment and human rights. She also has produced 2 documentary films, which I wasn't able to put in the chat, but if you go to her website, you can actually see them there, and I recommend people watching those as well. Welcome, Chaumtoli.
Thank you. Ramadan Mubarak to everyone. And if you're in South Asia, you would say Lal Salam, which is red salute for International Workers' Day.
I love that. How do you say it?
I'll put it. It's Lal, which means red, and Salam, which is the greeting Muslims give to each other.
Right, yes.
And that's what labor activists in South Asia greet each other.
Thank you so much, Lal Salam. All right, I'm trying to get our next, for some reason, I seem to have some problems here with copying and pasting things in the chat. I thought this would work here. Our next presenter is Pamela Lightsey, who currently serves as the Vice President for Academic Affairs at the Meadville Lombard Theological School in Chicago, where she's also an Associate Professor of Constructive Theology. Pamela Lightsey is an activist with the LGBTQ community, and she was on the ground during the first 20 days at Ferguson, and where she was also one of the live streamers providing ongoing broadcasts from Ferguson and the Black Lives Matter movement. She currently serves as a member of the Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot's Advisory Council on LGBT+ issues, LGBTQ+ issues. And among her publications is the book Our Lives Matter, a Womanist Queer Theology. Welcome, Pamela.
Very good to be with you all. Thank you.
And I have been introduced already, put this in the chat also. I'm here at Vanderbilt University, and I'm directing the Wendland-Cook program in Religion and Justice, which is one of the co-sponsors of this session today. I'll put the information about the Wendland-Cook program in the chat as well. Our website is www.religionandjustice.org, and we're doing this kind of work on economic, ecological justice, closely informed by connections to the labor movement and also worker cooperative networks across the country and the world. Our work is always intersectional, and therefore we are not only working on issues on class and labor, but also in conjunction with race, ethnicity, gender, and questions of sexuality. All right, well, again, welcome everybody for the session. The way we are proceeding today is I have 3 sets of questions that will bring the panelists into conversation with each other. This will take about an hour, and then we have time at the end for a conversation where the panelists can address each other, and people in the audience can post questions also. You can use the chat function for that. You can write your questions and we'll try to follow along and pick them up. If you're willing to do that, we would also appreciate for the attendance if you can put your names and affiliations in the chat so we get to introduce each other a little bit more, because I think we can see people, but this is always a bit more complicated than being in the same room. So let me begin with the first question, and I'll put those alphabetically, right? Let's start. First person on our list is KB. So KB, why don't you go first, and then we'll turn to Francisco, Chaumtoli, and then Pamela. This question of the relation of religion and labor is a long one. It has a long and varied history. We know that religion and labor have a lot to contribute to each other, But we also have to understand and admit that they have not always been supportive of each other. Let's start with the question about religion. It's clear to anybody that religion has not always been on the side of labor. In fact, religion, especially in the United States, has frequently sided with employers and corporations against labor. So here's my first question. Why in this climate should we bother with religion? Why should the labor movement pay attention? Why is religion important to the labor movement? And then what are the positive contributions that religion can make to a budding labor movement that's reinventing itself? And what are the challenges that come from this religious discourse? So let me put this question to KB, who will get us started.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joerg. What a extremely important question. And I have to give myself my shirt a shout out here, which says, God gave us one day of rest, unions gave us two, which is my theological framework that I'll be approaching this conversation with, unions continuing the work that God started. I've been a union organizer for the past decade, and in union organizing, the fundamentals of it is that if we have more people, we have more power to win. And we think about worksite organizing, we're really obsessed with how do we build to a super majority participation in order to have enough power to win justice, to win an end to discrimination in the workplace, et cetera. And so we look in the workplace at all the different groupings, the social groupings, people's shifts, their race. And we do that in order to find leaders to build to supermajority participation. Now, when I zoom out and look at, let's say, the US as a workplace, the supermajority of people in the US are part of some religion, right? Are a part of some faith. So if we want to, it feels so kind of simple and straightforward to me that if we want to build to the supermajority participation in our social movements for an end to racism and discrimination and low wage work, higher wages, that we have to engage with faith and labor and religious institutions because it's majority of people. And I'll share one quick story from my organizing in rural Pennsylvania, where I was running a campaign of nurses who were fighting for a union. And in rural Pennsylvania, there's really two places where people find meaning and belonging and convene with each other. It's their workplace and their church. And this was a place where the evangelical church was, every single nurse went to an evangelical church. And in the union campaign, we made a really strategic error in the labor movement in my union to not engage with workers in their places of faith and not to engage with the clergy. So a few months into the campaign, when the workers were starting to build to majority towards their union vote, the management brought in a union busting law firm to coach them how to get them to vote no for the union. And they cited my past work of working with immigrants and for racial justice. And they said they spread a rumor that unions actually funded abortions. And once this happened, the campaign was over. We lost, everybody turned on the campaign. And to me, this is such an important example of what happens when we're not working together and we're not meeting workers also in their place of faith, where they find their whole worldview and sense of meaning and understanding of the world, right? And so that was an opportunity where we could have worked together and it would have 100% made the difference. And in this case, it led to us losing this campaign in a really strategic swing county in Pennsylvania that if it hadn't voted for Trump, Trump wouldn't have won. So there's just big implications there. So I'll pause there.
Thank you so much. That is a fascinating story because it also reminds us that religion is one of the battlegrounds on which things are happening. And if you don't organize it, if it is not for you, it might very well be organized against you. I also like this term that you've introduced us to here, KB, supermajority. It's really building broad-based movements, and especially in the United States, religion is broad-based and deeply rooted. Wendland-Cook, our program at Vanderbilt is in the Southeast, and we see this especially in the Southeast, but many of the other areas in the country, especially, you know, the ones that you just mentioned, KB, as well as areas, that are more rural, are also heavily religious. So this is something that I believe labor organizers can benefit from. And of course, you are the examples that this is already happening. Let me turn to Francisco and ask him about the same question.
Sure, and I think KB set it up perfectly to say that if we're going to talk about how religion might be important to the labor movement, let's talk about what kind of religion are we talking about, right? And first to say that there's a lot of bad religion out there. It reminds me of the song from the Black church tradition, have you got good religion, right? And the response is certainly, Lord. And there's all kinds of responses, right? This call and response. Do you love everybody? Certainly, Lord. Have you been converted? Have you been baptized? And I've heard that song sort of in the context of justice movements where sometimes the lyrics get changed, right? Will you stand up for justice? Certainly, Lord. Will we fight for our neighbors? Certainly, Lord, right? And you can add all kinds of different ways to that tradition. But so we have to ask ourselves, do we have good religion? And not in the traditional sense, but where we, especially in the Christian context, religion has been so weaponized and sort of driven to this very narrow set of interests, ideologies, and certain ways of seeing the world. And the prosperity gospel we know is rampant in our culture. The individualism is rampant in our culture. The level of consumption is rampant in our culture, and religion, bad religion, I would say, has a lot to do with that. So if we're going to talk about how religion can be transformative in the context of labor, to the extent that we have good religion, that we are being converted, not in the traditional sense, but into a new way of being that views our religious and spiritual lives as intimately connected with our material lives, right? Our economic lives. And then that must include our lives as working people, all of us. Our common economic life. Good religion will then help us critically respond to unjust economic structures and support the kinds of organizing and partnerships that can transform unjust conditions. A story about how this maybe begins to happen is, we have, in the Christian context, we have parables upon parables, scriptures upon scriptures that deal with economics, but again, they get spiritualized away, where matters of spirit and economy, matters of materiality and spirituality are separated. But if we took an example of the story of the parable of the workers in the vineyard in the Gospel of Matthew 20, economics is front and center in that story. But how do we read this text with our communities? How are we engaging in a critical social, economic, political, theological examination of the text and how it relates to our own lives and to the structures that we encounter ourselves in as workers, as bosses, in our actual world? And so I've done these kinds of readings with parishioners, and it's amazing how when we do this kind of work, then we start to sort of tap into who we are as people, as working people, our full identity, our spiritual identity, our economic identity, and then we start to get into questions of class and how then we might enter into this work differently. How might we show up in a way that can be transformative, and then begin to build solidarity?
Thank you so much, Francisco. I think this is a crucial point. There's good religion and then there is bad religion. And I think what we're talking about here is that religion and labor together can help us sort out which is which and deepen the various players, right? Deepen religion, also deepen the labor movement, and go back and forth in this way. If you've just joined us, the question is, what positive contributions can religion make to the labor movement? And what are the challenges it might present to a revitalized labor movement? Let me turn next to Chaumtoli Huck and ask you that question, Chaumtoli.
Great, thank you. So I want to actually build up on, KB's point about worldview. And oftentimes when I sort of answer this question of religion and labor, I refer to more around the spirituality, and a definition that a mentor of mine sort of gave, which I think sometimes sort of makes those of us maybe who are on the left a little bit hesitant around religion, which is ultimately spirituality is the human spirit desiring for meaning and connection. And so if we look at faith as just simply another way by which human beings sort of seek connection with each other, seek meaning of their lives. And I think Francisco said this, how do we organize our material and spiritual lives so it's not bifurcated? Then I think just presenting it in that way is important. So I wanted to raise 3 points from the perspective of Islam, and also realizing that we actually live religious pluralist lives. So I was born in Bangladesh, so obviously Islam is the majority religion, but there is very profound philosophical traditions. For example, the Baul tradition, which is of folk, a folk tradition espousing humanism that really was anti-colonial during British colonialism. And so I draw from both of these traditions and kind of like how I approach labor. And I think it's also important to kind of decenter ourselves from the United States and looking at how do global communities organize their spiritual lives. So there's 3 points what I think within Islam where there is a departure in just thinking about religion that is fundamentally different than Christianity. I think probably more aligned with Judaism. And I think we have to really have that conversation. So I want to lift those points up. So the 3 areas is, and I think we're in Ramadan, so those Muslims who are fasting are really thinking deeply about these concepts. So Islam's view of labor and economic justice is actually not similar to how we think about European values and enlightenment. So for example, within Islam, it's religiously obligated to you to share your wealth. Zakat is a tax. It's not charity. They're separate. It's a concept called sadaqah. We give charity, but in addition to charity, you have to give surplus wealth, right? So those of us who are labor and a little bit tilt to the left can maybe see where I'm going with this. So something like tax the rich isn't such a far off concept for us because it's something that's religiously obligated to do. Throughout the Quran, there are numerous instances where those who are accumulate wealth are asked to give it, to share it. And there's a hierarchy of orphans, children, widows, and what have you. And during Ramadan, you're supposed to give to those who are hungry. This is a religious obligation. And I love sort of KB's sort of like, God gave us some things and then we sort of build on it through organizing. It's sort of the same concept that Islam as a foundation requires us to share our wealth and is against the accumulation of wealth. And the idea was that if we periodically shared our wealth through this taxing system, there would be no poverty. So in many ways, and I'm not necessarily the majority view on this, see Islam more aligned with democratic socialism. When we talk about economic democracy and political democracy, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing onto him, was a trader, right? Trader meaning commerce. And so it was part of early mercantile capitalism. And so the fact that he saw sort of the early social ills of capitalism, I think is important. The other 2 areas, and here I just want to pause, it's very interesting that the vast majority of Muslim Americans in the United States supported Bernie Sanders, right? I think that his platform is, I think, in many ways resonant with the religious philosophies of Muslims. Again, I'm not offering this as sort of like, this is one point of view. There's obviously discourse and debate. The other 2 points that I just wanted to kind of lift up is this idea of a universal transnational community. We call this the global ummah. This is that you're, irrespective of your race, your nationality, your status, you're part of this larger community, this global community that's transnational. And I think that also, I think, is really important to lift up as we're doing global labor solidarity work and for my own work as well, right? Because the Prophet was concerned about tribalism, sectionalism, and also how we actually act in relationship to our bloodline, right? the Prophet himself lost his parents early on. And so he was raised actually through a collective system of care. The last thing I just want, again, these are just foundational to show that how Islam offers a different concept of the polity, of democracy. And I think that unless we're really willing to kind of go there, so that's part of why I'm like lifting these up. The third one that I think is profound for human rights is this idea that you are sufficient. That if you believe in Allah, you are sufficient. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to do anything. You just need to be. And so for me, that as the undergird of human rights is critical. It's not based on the states providing me my human rights. It's inalienable by virtue of my existence. So I think just lifting up these 3 points, I think, as a departure from sort of the dominant views of individualism, anti-collectivism, the idea that I have to prove my worth, the deserving poor, choice, right? All of these things that kind of thwart any social justice. I think that Islam provides sort of a counterpoint. This is not to romanticize it and not at all to suggest that there aren't problems, as you mentioned earlier. But I think one of the reasons why Islamophobia has been so rampant is that it's threatening to Western capitalism, that Islam threatens the foundation of wealth accumulation. And I think that if we really want to talk about economic justice, religious democracy, and political democracy, that lifting up ideologies, resistance that to economic equality is important. So I'll just pause there.
Thank you so much, Chaumtoli. This is a really helpful contribution because it helps us to see where some of the challenges are, and it pushes us way beyond just typical Western conversations about fairness, or being nice to each other. I have actually made some of this argument in my own work, going through the 3 Abrahamic traditions. Christianity is the middle one, Judaism is the oldest one, Christianity in the middle, and then Islam, arguing that some of the things that you're saying about Islam really tie the 3 together, except that Christianity has to reclaim a lot of this. I think you're exactly right that Christianity in its Western mindset has forgotten a lot of these things. In the Jewish tradition, there's this notion of justice. In the Hebrew, it's the word is tzedakah, which sounds very close to the Arabic word that you just recited, Chaumtoli. And justice in the Jewish tradition, which informs the Christian and the Muslim tradition, ultimately means to take sides with the victims. It doesn't mean just be fair and be nice and hover above the struggle, but be in the struggle on the side of those who are struggling. You mentioned this is the month of Ramadan, very crucial because those are deep ways of connecting religion and labor. Rosemary and I talk about that in the book as well. In Christianity, I have argued, what if Christmas was actually seen as a labor celebration, because the person who is born, Jesus, is actually a construction worker, right? Day labor in construction, to be precise. In Judaism, it's the Passover, where you have this remembrance of the Exodus, the liberation from Egypt, that ties all 3 Abrahamic traditions together. There's Quranic traditions, there's Hebrew traditions, there's biblical traditions. So there's a fascinating conversation, and I'm really glad to hear you put before us these challenges that are really important, not just for people of faith, but really for the labor movement, I believe, as well. So last but not least, let's move on to Pamela Lightsey. The question is, what are the contributions that religion can make to the labor movement? What are the challenges?
Well, thank you. And I want to thank my colleagues for all that's been said so far today. I want to start by acknowledging on this day the first unpaid laborers of this nation state. Their free labor was rationalized, to your question, with a horrible use and interpretation of Christian sacred text. My African ancestors were, and for the most part, even to this day, by white supremacists, were nothing more than mere brutes, animals, property that had super strength and therefore must be tamed. What my ancestors did, in fact, was Christianize the white Christianity that was presented to them using their worldview and using their spiritual traditions. And their worldview, the worldview of my ancestors, was a view of liberation, a view of justice, a view of equality for all, and a view very much in line with caring for this world that we have inherited and that we, in fact, must be caretakers of. A little bit about myself. My father was a union worker. My father worked with the railroad, as well as was also a day laborer. My mother was a maid for wealthy homeowners of Palm Beach, and she later went on to work as part of a hospital cleaning staff. And you all know the unheralded job that the hospital cleaning staff across our country has done during this pandemic. And I've been praying for hospital workers during the pandemic, very much thinking about my mother, my late mother, honoring her memory, and continue to pray for them and the work that they do. Now, religion, in my perspective, from my experience, was always a contributing factor of our lives. For me, this question, Joerg, that you presented for us this morning, begs another question which some of my colleagues have kind of problematized and worked with, and that question is, what is meant by religion? What is meant by religion? In my experience, in the religious context that I have experienced, religion is usually, very often, siding with labor, as religion is part of our everyday lives. It is part, religion and labor, these are mixed into the everyday lives of Black communities. It is part of the communal language of Black communities. The religion of Black communities is kind of religion of Black churches in America, and the religion of Black churches in America. Now I'm speaking of predominantly Black churches in America, and to that extent, I'm speaking about such liberationist churches as the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, those independent churches that came out of slavery in America, those Black churches that continue from that Black radical tradition, and the churches that have come up that are predominantly Black in America that continue that tradition. For them, okay, religion is both sacred and secular. Religion is private and it is public. It is involved in politics, it's involved in economic policy making, it's involved in the labor movement, it's a part of entertainment, and so on and so forth. There is not this dichotomy that people very often like to draw about the differences between labor and religion and whatever. I don't have that experience as a Black woman growing up in Black churches in America. This is very much, I would also remind you, this is very much, the labor movement was very much the center of Dr. King's work, later work in America before he was assassinated, his work on poverty. You remember the strike with the garbage men, I think it was in Tennessee. And you also would remember, I live in Chicago, so probably I don't need to remember, I just need to just point to it, Rainbow Push Coalition that grew out of SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Rainbow Push was developed with the sole purpose of protecting Black people's economic interests. It was created to work with businesses, created to ensure job placement for Black youth, created to ensure that contracts, particularly here in Chicago, to ensure that city contracts went to Black businesses. Push still to this day, well, not so much during the pandemic, but Push still conducts what's called an annual Black business exposition. And Jesse Jackson is the leader of Push. It is not separate. It is, if you go to Push headquarters, every week they have a sort of worship service. And so you see that mix of the work for labor and justice and religion all together. So it's not that dichotomy. And I think that's something to draw on. And I think that's something that Joerg, that we can talk about more and more, because I think that's the direction that I think your question is calling us to. So both work and religion very much are part of the shaping mechanisms, at least as I have experienced in my life as a Black woman.
Thank you so much, Pamela. This is really crucial, because it helps us refocus what we're talking about, right? When people say religion, sometimes we have these Western ideas of religion as a private enterprise, something that you do in church on Sunday morning, or something that's in your head or somewhere. Whereas this broader definition that you're suggesting, and that's more and more a definition that many of us are working with, is religion as a way of life. So it includes everything. It includes, for good and for ill, right? It includes building power for the right side or for the wrong side. It includes everyday practices and so on. Thank you also for tying this back to the history of African-American people in the United States, all the way back to slavery. An argument can be made that capitalism, and actually has been made, that capitalism in the United States is so brutal because of that DNA that goes back to the exploitation of people, which is the ultimate exploitation in slavery. And that, of course, then also has implications for labor relations. Yet what we can also see is that there is the emergence of this practical religion that is not only practical, but that is liberative, that helps people not only survive, but to build power and to live better lives and to build something else. That is the other legacy, I think, that we really have to keep in mind. So when we talk about this good religion that Francisco mentioned earlier, the great thing is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already there. It happens in the communities that we have been reminded of, certainly way beyond the dominant communities. Oftentimes it happens more in the marginalized communities, and it happens around the world. So there's an international component here. To the international component of labor, you have the international component of a religion that is very encouraging, and that has made a difference throughout history, even though today it doesn't seem to be making front page news anymore. So as we go on, there's a second set of questions I would like to pose now, and mix up the order just a little bit. We have 4 sections, so KB went first. Now Francisco is going first. We go to Chaumtoli, Pamela, and then back to KB, and then we next round, then Chaumtoli gets to be first. So here's the second cluster of questions. And by the way, I'm always putting a few resources in the chat as well of where these things have been addressed in various places. Feel free to add yours. And very soon, we'll also invite people to start posting questions that we'll pick up at the end of the session. So the second cluster of questions, if you look at how religion and labor have collaborated in the past, there have been certain problems, and we need to talk about those as well. Some of these problems found expression in the tongue-in-cheek talk about the rent-a-collar model. You've probably heard this, right? Or rent-a-congregation paradigm, which point to a one-sidedness in the relationship. This is sort of mobilizing versus organizing, perhaps. What we're thinking about is deeper relationships between religion and labor, fresh relationships. And the question is, how can we do this? How can we deepen those relationships beyond some of the one-sidedness of the past? What are the positive contributions now that labor might make to religion? We asked, what can religion contribute to labor? What can labor contribute to religion? Might labor help revitalize and perhaps even transform religion in promising ways? And I think we've already heard some examples for what that connection is vital. But my question is, what still needs to happen? What are we going to do today? And how does this mutual relationship really become a mutual one? So Francisco, let me put this to you first.
Thanks, Joerg. And yeah, thank you to all the panelists for the rich conversation that's already taken place. As a clergy person, and then as a lay leader before that, I've been active in faith and labor movements in Los Angeles for a good while, and a good portion of that was with CLU, Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, an interfaith justice organization that actually came out of a really good example that I want to share. CLU itself came out of an organic sort of struggle that really represented what Pamela was talking about in terms of this integration between religion and labor in everyday life for so many people. And in immigrant communities, this is often the case as well. And so in the 1990s, there was an effort to, people may recall the movement for when the living wage movement was starting to, get off the ground. And, Baltimore and the Build was sort of like the community, broad-based community organization, which included labor and faith and community, partners in this coalition to push for this living wage in Baltimore. LA was, I think, maybe the second in the country and the largest, obviously because of its size, it had a big impact in terms of a metropolis that was pushing for a living wage. And faith participation really sort of happened organically through who the workers were, right? These were immigrant workers, Black workers that, worked at the airports that the city had, was a city entity. And so their faith was a big part of their lives, and the unions that were involved in this work realized that, right? And so when the city made a move to cut contracts, right, basically get rid of union jobs and replace union jobs with minimum wage jobs without benefits, this is what prompted the organizing for a living wage in Los Angeles. And faith engagement was a part of that process from the very beginning. And so the way that I think labor, in this case, kind of radicalized religion was to sort of draw out the best of the religious traditions, right? To tap in what was already present in the traditions, and to really be part of this sort of campaign over a course of a couple years to bring the question of economic justice and what is the right thing to do together in conversation. And so out of the union that was involved, there were two unions actually. I think it was the hotel workers union and the janitors union, the service employees union, sort of knew that they couldn't win merely on by explaining the economics alone, right? The economics made sense, right? But there needed to be this sort of deeper understanding of what this was about. And it was really about restoring dignity to working people in Los Angeles, where sort of economic forces had really taken over and trampled upon people. And the question was, what was going to win, at the end of the day in the city? Was it going to be a just, livable city for all of its inhabitants, with particular attention to, those who were working the low wage jobs that made the city run, right? Or was it going to be, a city that exploited and that benefited off the backs of this labor? And so this was a process where authentic and organic community building and faith and labor traditions were sort of informing each other in a very powerful way. but I think that is, and it had impact beyond that, right? It led to the consistent presence of an interfaith justice organization for CLU, which started very informally, to continue its work and to be deeply rooted in these contexts.
Thank you so much, Francisco, for those stories and the experiences that have shaped. I know it has shaped your own thinking too, and your academic work as a PhD student. I see this in what you're writing and what you're producing. And I can testify to the fact that the sort of things that Francisco just said are feeding back into the religious academy and are making a difference there. I think this comes as a surprise to a lot of people of faith that hadn't realized quite yet that we may need to organize faith communities as the labor community, just like we're organizing everything else. So faith here is not necessarily an automatic ally. It can be, sometimes it is, but a lot more could be done. And Francisco, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Let me turn the question to Chaumtoli next.
Yes, so I wanted to answer this. I think I read the question differently. So, but in terms of the direct question about sort of what religion can learn from labor, I think, first of all, at least with respect to the Muslim community, I think labor needs to do a better job. I am just kind of interested, I sort of see during different holidays or events, are there sort of messages even of like Ramadan Mubarak, Unite HERE, which has a large Muslim membership, does that. There are a few others, but very few unions actually engage their Muslim membership. And I think the way in which Muslim Americans have been characterized as a community that's been surveilled. And I also want to talk a little bit historically in terms of the Black Muslim tradition. It's a community that has been also subject to police brutality. And Pamela in the chat lifted up that one of the early and free peoples were Muslims and were very much part of the abolitionist movement. And so there's a rich Black Muslim tradition that continually is getting suppressed, but just I'll come back to that. So I think just I would say that the labor movement needs to engage the Muslim working class a bit more in terms of its membership. 9/11 has kind of really just sort of created community organizing. That's not to say organizing hadn't occurred before, and I'll just talk about that in the context of Malcolm X and the Black Muslim tradition. But being surveilled, being subject to state violence through the Guantanamo, all of those things, being seen as a foreigner, I think oftentimes makes this community sort of perhaps folks want to sort of separate from, right? Because if you're trying to curry favors from the state in terms of like certain rights, it's not a community that has actually been, engaged. And so I guess I would say that there are a lot of labor groups outside of the traditional labor movement that have as its membership majority Muslim. So the Street Vendors Project that's organizing street vendors in New York City, the New York Taxi Workers Alliance has as much of its membership, a large number that are Muslim and part of the Muslim working class. Most essential workers, my own community, the Bangladeshi community, have been very much impacted by COVID. Every time I get sad news of someone who's passed away and they're unable to even bury their dead. So I think that labor, on this question, I think labor actually needs to do a little bit better. And I think there's been a vibrant movement, interfaith organizing that's been happening that Francisco speaks to, but I think it really still remains in the realm of engaging with sort of, I think, Christian faith-based groups, maybe. There's a little bit of change from that. Of course, Trump's Muslim ban has also energized a group of Muslim organizers. When you think about prison organizing, Islam is the fastest growing religion in prison. Prison, because of white supremacy, has a majority of African-American Latinx. When we think about the intersection of race, economic justice, and the carceral state, I think like Islam has, should be engaged a little bit more than I think it has. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that: Islamophobia, lack of familiarity, and what have you. Just going to end with, I think we also need to kind of lift up these counter narratives. Francisco's point about how Christianity has been sort of taken over by sort of imperial sort of ideologies and removed from its social justice roots. I think we need to recover those narratives and of resistance and radicalism. So just to give you some framework, in the US context, Malcolm X's philosophy just before he was assassinated on the Organization of African American Unity, if you look at the platform, it's phenomenal, right? It's sort of like, we're having this conference on economic democracy, but he's already sort of done that. And he talks about there are two kinds of power that count in America: economic and political, with social power deriving from the two. In order for the African Americans to control their destiny, they must be able to affect the decisions which control their destiny, right? This can be done through organizing. Malcolm X, Prophet Muhammad, Moses, Isa, they were all organizers ultimately in my mind. So I think that we just need to recover some of these narratives and traditions and lift that up, because there's already a sort of a blueprint, if we will, if we're willing to kind of engage with it. The other thing I just wanted to lift up is, there's a reason why the Nation of Islam, whatever your views are on it, Malcolm X has been considered a pariah in sort of civil rights movement, is because I think he unapologetically, one, informed by his faith, has said that we need to build economic independence. We need to build alternative structures in order to fight for social justice. So he didn't use the word abolition, but ultimately, right, that is what he's talking about, right? Dismantling the system and building a new system. And I think that's connected very much, or at least I resonate with what he says, not just as a Muslim civil rights person, but because of the faith tradition from which he comes out of. So I'll just stop there, but there's numerous stories that we just have to re-engage rather than trying to create something new.
I wish we had a lot more time for this conversation, because there's so much rich information here, and also I think the sort of things that faith leaders have to take to heart, especially when they think about labor, and labor leaders have to take it to heart, because it can no longer be just a matter of leadership communicating and talking to each other. It is a matter of deep organizing at the grassroots with the communities. And unless we do that, I think we're not really benefiting from this conversation as much as we should. Chaumtoli reminded us that in our various religious traditions, many of the leaders are actually organizers. We often think of them as powerful preachers, perhaps, but Moses, in the various traditions, is more than a great preacher or a religious leader. Moses is an organizer, and that's true for most of the other great figures also. In Christianity, there's a current reclaiming of Jesus as an organizer. You can talk about the Prophet Muhammad in that way as well. And that's not a disrespect, that's actually reclaiming this full-bodied religion that we all care about and that has shaped us so deeply. So let me turn this question to Pamela next about what might labor help us in religion to see and to organize.
Yeah, I kind of looked at it a little differently, maybe a little differently also. And that's because I just inwardly don't have that experience of separating labor and religion. And so it's very difficult for me to talk about labor as though the people who are leaders in labor unions are not also sitting in the seats of our congregations, of our synagogues, of our mosques. They are, or to speak as though leaders of labor unions, or to think as though, persons who are in the pews are not actually also workers. and or on strike against businesses. So it all, for me, is deeply, deeply connected. And I think when religion and work are understood as deeply connected, then we can really begin to have a conversation about a deeper conversation, I think, about better collaboration that takes place. Maybe it's just because I speak from my experience, but I know that there are some contexts where you can't talk about politics from the pulpit. That has never been my experience. I know there are churches where politics cannot be spoken of from the pulpit, but that has never been my context. And I think it's not my context because Black liberation in America could never be brought to fore without the conversations about labor, without the conversations about politics taking place in the pulpit. And heretofore not lately, but politicians even recognize if they want something done, if they want to vote, they need to come to the church in order to convince parishioners to vote for them. So it's not divided in that way. But as we've been talking, I've been thinking very much about Jesus as both a leader and as a laborer himself. And I've been thinking about the labor, at least in my context, about the ways we think about God, not only as mysterium, but the way we think about God as the first laborer who scooped up the dust of the ground and created something through God's own labor. I think about that and the ways that we articulate it in my tradition. But I also think about great leaders like the Reverend Albert Cleage out of Detroit. Some of you all may remember him through the Shrine of the Black Madonna in Detroit. Reverend Cleage was inspired by the work of another reverend who was a pro-union pastor, and that pastor was Horace White. And Reverend Horace White, was really, really in deep conversations and collaborations with the CIO, the UAW, other kind of union, kind of labor work. And it was really, really important for Horace White to be involved in the union movement, in the labor movement, and for his parishioners to understand the importance of that involvement. Cleage and his wife, they established themselves in Detroit. And not only did they get involved with this, but they pushed it in another direction, and that was the development of voting blocks. That is, blocks of people for the first time, bring together powerful voting blocks of Black people so that they had political power to do the kinds of things that Horace White and others were thinking about. So it's working hand in hand here. Now, my experience today, if we think about positive contributions, I'm thinking of a group that I work with called the Pan Methodist Commission. The Pan Methodist Commission is a national gathering or national group of predominantly Methodist, predominantly Black bishops and clergy leaders who gather and have conversations about work that they can do. There are some commitments they have made. One, we don't cross picket lines. Secondly, we really pay attention to what hotels we make contracts with. So that's one of the ways, I think, even in today, that some of the work that we do can support the work of labor, can support the work of unions, and also the way that unions can also support our religious context. I think I'll just stop right there.
Thank you for that reminder, Pamela. That is at the heart of the conversation that we're having. So I think it's crucial to realize that who is sitting in the pews, if you use the Christian language here, is, you know, working people. And if you take the Occupy Wall Street language saying we are the 99%, then it's even clearer, you know, who has an interest. At the same time, I think there's this question, how self-consciously are people of faith bringing their labor identity into their religious communities? And if you think about that, I spent 20 years teaching in Texas, where most of the labor movement was also members of religious communities. And very oftentimes in these communities, people didn't even know that somebody was unionized. And that's not only in the white communities, this is also in the minority communities. So what we are talking about and what we're, I think, hoping for is building these deeper connections, bringing these identities out into the open. And the beauty of it is that then religious communities are actually being organized from the bottom up rather than from the top down. I think too often we assume that it is the clergy, that it is the leaders that will bring along the communities. But as Francisco said in the chat, these communities are oftentimes also the places where the ruling class meets, and so the pastors are torn. Whereas if the members organize, if people actually come together and bring these things back to attention, that oftentimes gives the religious leaders of various religious groups some courage to speak about what they might want to speak about in the first place. KB, you're closing off this round of questions, and let me remind the audience, if you have any questions, please start posting them in the chat. We have a lot of material. We can go on for a long time, but if you would like your questions to be addressed, feel free to post them. So KB, let me turn it over to you.
Great. Wow, this is just such a smart, amazing group of people. I feel very lucky to be part of this crew. So Pamela's point about the kind of how we silo these two worlds, but it's not real. It's like a fake silo that we're making up as if faith and labor, as if people aren't both of these things, I think is so important. And the labor movement has a chronic problem of seeing them separately. And that example I gave of rural Pennsylvania, I think is a perfect example of when we don't recognize that people are also people of faith, and how that can be a huge strategic mistake. In a campaign I was running in Philadelphia with a hospital, a group of nurses, we started to kind of do what Pamela was talking about and see people as whole people, as also people of faith and workers. So when we went to negotiate the first contract, we talked to the nurses about their institutions of faith, and we held negotiations in one of the biggest Black churches in Philadelphia. And the nurses, it was such a different experience for the nurses to negotiate in a place of faith. And it was a long and deep relationship that the nurses then built with the faith community in North Philadelphia where they were rooted. And we actually went through, and every single nurse in the hospital, we tracked what was their faith, where did they attend a place of worship, and then the nurses went out and actually spoke to all of their clergy, their imam, their rabbi, everyone, and got their support for the campaign, and also said, how can we work together in a transformative way long term? And so from the very beginning of the campaign, I think that shows what is possible when we work together in these transformative ways, and see and recognize this dichotomy that Pamela is pointing out. And of course, they won safe staffing, they won so much at this hospital in their negotiations because they negotiated in a different way, where they partnered with faith communities and community organizations and were able to win not only higher wages and benefits, but issues that impact actually the patients that they serve and the communities that they serve. And that's really what bargaining for the common good is all about, is how can we work together, faith, labor, and community long-term, using negotiations as this leverage point that isn't just about workers' wages and benefits, but is actually about winning the kind of communities that and schools and hospitals that we deserve. And I'll say, I just, to Chaumtoli's point earlier, that just stuck with me so much about you are sufficient, she said, and this tenet from Islam. I think about labor as a re-sanctifying force, about how faith institutions and labor institutions really re-sanctify the world and re-dignify work. How capitalism and patriarchy and white supremacy are so isolating, and where everything is commodified, and the sacredness is really taken out of the world. And I remember I grew up Catholic and queer, and left the Catholic Church early on because of the relationship to queerness and patriarchy. And it was labor that brought me back to God, actually. It was labor when I found the workers' rights group on my college campus that said, what happened to your mom working 2 jobs, and your cousin in jail and being evicted, that's not okay, that work has dignity, that we want to create a world where what happened to your family isn't okay, that it re-sanctified the world for me. It made it so that people that I loved had that inherent worth, that were seen as sufficient unto themselves, that had inherent worth and dignity again. And it brought me back, it gave me faith again, it gave me hope. And then it was my path to coming back to God and pursuing ministry. And I'll just end by saying, I think that these faith and labor institutions have so much to learn from each other about this. And I'll make a sweeping claim here that is not true everywhere, but I find true, which is that labor institutions are really good at being strategic and building power and winning, but they reproduce a lot of the problems that we are trying to fight against: racism, sexism, too many of our unions being run by men, by white people, not being inclusive, not prioritizing racial justice. And then, but they win, right? And then we have faith organizing and institutions that have really cultures of care and supporting people and longevity, and don't have as much problem with burnout and toxic culture. But a lot of times we're just pulling together the same clergy over and over again, right? We're not doing a lot of that new and deep organizing. So I think that the labor and faith institutions have so much to learn from each other about building power, and then also centering race and centering gender and sexuality, and building kind of healthy and transformative organizational culture that sustains people, that people are resilient to keep fighting for the long term. So I hope we can begin to learn from each other, not just so we can win, but so that we can build kind of transformative organizational culture that sustains people for the long haul, because it's a long fight ahead.
Wow, thank you so much, KB. That was an amazing testimony in various ways, right? Also saying that it was labor that brought you back to God. I've been a professor of theology for a long time, and I would say the same thing. It is engagement in matters of labor on the ground, in the struggle, that keep bringing me back to God, in a profession where a lot of people, sort of as time goes on, maybe keep writing and talking, but that deep connection is not always there. And for me, that is one of the key points. And I think a lot of people in the movements feel that same way. So there is a religious labor movement, I think that's emerging here, or a religion and labor movement that doesn't have to draw the line at any one religion. This is why we're interreligious, deeply committed to interreligious experiences, and we can deal with people who are not religious also. So the problem here is not religion, yes or no, it's good or bad religion, and what is that good religion doing? And that is something, that people who are not people of faith can see and value. That's been my experience for a very long time, that the problem with the religion is usually with the bad parts of it. And then to look at this deep organizing, we've coined a term at the Wendland-Cook program. I did this about 10 years ago, coming out of the Occupy Wall Street movement, talking about deep solidarity, something that deeply connects us with each other, and that builds power way beyond any mobilizing effort. I mean, this is deep organizing, like you're saying. Thank you so much for that. I'm looking at the time. We haven't gotten through our final question yet, and we also wanted to raise some questions, but I do not see very many questions or comments in the chat. So participants who would like to participate, still feel free to do that. There are some really helpful references here. A notion of comprehensive charting that we could be talking about, a question about how can the secular labor movement and religious labor movement work together better. Maybe we can fold these questions into our final round. And for that one, let me ask Chaumtoli to start us off, then Pamela, KB, and Francisco last. So this last question really is a broad one, asking each of the panelists, and keep in mind the time, maybe 2-minute statements. What are your hopes for the next steps of the interaction of religion and labor? Where might there be the untapped potential? What are the challenges? This might be a place for talking about this notion of economic democracy as well, because Americans are always clear about political democracy. This is one of our values. This is one thing that we are truly proud of. But how would economic democracy feed into this, and maybe even religious democracy? Would these be values that could be brought together in these next steps that you're envisioning? So Chaumtoli, let me ask you to go first, please.
Yeah, I also want to just echo KB's, like, I think my sort of connection to faith has been deepened through my introduction through labor movement. So, but I also just wanted to take a pause. I know we don't have a lot of time, that we focus mostly on the Abrahamic traditions, but in Bengal and Bangladesh, there are actually other traditions. I mentioned to you the Baal tradition, Buddhism, and also I think when you look at the farmers' mass movement, the largest movement of workers in the globe in India, a part of it is inspired by Sikhism, which also has very deep, profound sort of values around social justice. So I think whatever faith practices, and also this moving away from a monotheism, there are a lot of faiths that are animist and that are non-polytheistic. I think Pamela sort of alluded to sort of African traditions as well. So I just want us to put a placeholder there, and so when we talk about these religion, that we're really clear that it's really in its broadest sense. So I guess I just only wanted to say, in terms of this last point, because this whole conference is about the new social compact, and I just wanted to make kind of maybe a point on that as it relates to like religion and labor. I think the way that we're conceiving the social compact, we're again sort of redoing the same mistakes, rooted very much, I think, in European Enlightenment values, right? The whole language of the compact comes out of the sort of Rousseau's idea of the social contract. It's very much transactional, that the government and the polity, we get something as a result of our participation in that polity. So I guess, like, if there's any takeaway, I think for me is, I think we really need to have a serious sort of conversation around decolonizing and sort of challenging the assumptions that go into some of our labor policies. So for me, I understand the social compact, I understand the New Dealism, but I also think that it's a concept that really reinforces the problems that we're experiencing. So if we say that the labor or our labor rights are rooted in some idea of a contract, and I teach contracts, right, in law school, is then what we're doing inadvertently is ushering a view of individualism, that my participation in the polity is by virtue of my individualism. We're ushering in these notions of choice only in America do you have a choice not to have healthcare. I mean, it's just astounding to me, So these sort of very pernicious ideas of choice, which again rooted very much in this in slavery and sort of like thinking about how we construct the choices that we have, and less on mutual interdependence. And again, this idea that by virtue of being, I have a right to dignified living, right? So I think what religion and faith can really sort of instill is to shift this paradigm. We have to dramatically shift sort of what it means to be a member of this democracy. What does it mean to be a polity? If I can't contribute, if I'm disabled, if I am unemployed, if I have certain faults that make me sort of unable to kind of contribute, every single member of our society has a right to dignified wages, living. And I think that I'm just worried that the way that we're conceiving some of these issues just reinforces those same values. We need a policy that's really about interdependence, caring and nourishing. And I think that comes from faith traditions about love, the beloved community, radical love. And I think that these principles we need to inject a little bit more into our discussion of labor rights. And I guess I was a little bit of push towards rethinking what do we mean about this social compact? How are we organizing our relationship to each other? It should be about interdependence, love, and compassion. And I think unless we really challenge that, I worry that we're just going to be having this conversation perhaps years to come.
Thank you, Chaumtoli. This is for us really important to push beyond some of the status quo conversations that we're oftentimes having. I think we're realizing a lot of that comes out of a Western mindset that's also shaped by capitalism and slavery. So to remind ourselves of that is crucial. And then let me reinforce what you said about the interreligious dialogue. This is at the core of it as well. And I submit to everybody that in this labor struggle, you can find a new way of working interreligiously. Too often academics thought interreligious dialogue is people sitting in a room talking about ideas, but engaging these struggles together and realizing that we have different resources. I mean, you beautifully showed us the resources of Islam early on in this session. That's something that all of us need to learn. The Christians especially need to learn. Pamela showed us the resources from the Black Christian traditions that we have to reclaim and so on. When that happens, I think we have a quantum leap in our movements that is probably around the corner if we do our work right. So thank you so much for that. Pamela, let me turn to you next, maybe 2 or 3 minutes statement, and then we conclude with KB and Francisco.
I thank my colleague, my dear colleague Chaumtoli, for what she has just offered us. And I really sat with what she had to say about individualism versus over and against, maybe a more powerful idea of interdependence, which is something all of the great leaders of our times have pushed us to think about and to see the benefit of. I am concerned about, I'm looking at the tenor of not just this nation state, but the tenor of our globe. And my concern is how do we safely as a people who truly are interdependent upon one another, across waters, across lands, how do we safely reach our goals? Across the globe, you will see what is happening now is that the power elite recognize that the people are have been rising up for at least a decade. They've been rising up for equality, justice, for economic democracy. That has been happening all across the globe. America is not unique here. They want to think they're unique, but they're not. And there has been a rise and a cry for some sort of, equality, liberation, justice for the people who are all interdependent upon one another. We cannot continue to live on this great globe with 1% or less than 1% of the people controlling all of the resources of this world, controlling the vast majority of the resources of this world, with a major group of workers who are eking out every day the products that continue to make them richer and richer and more and greedier and more selfish. It just won't continue to work. And yet who is it? Frederick Douglass, honorable, venerable ancestor, said that power will never concede without a struggle. And yet where the struggle is where the power elite have begun to establish laws, have begun to violently push against the workers' rights for agency, for liberation. Yes, here in America, you have voter suppression laws. Yes, here in America, you have anti-protest laws that are being legislated and that are being approved. But across the globe, you have a power elite who are establishing through violence, who are trying to root themselves even more deeply into their pockets of greed. And the question for us is, how do we develop a sophisticated system to overcome that? Because they understand the power elite have studied our methodology. They had a long time to study our methodology, and this is why you have the laws against protest, because they understand a huge protest is a major, it affects people, it moves people, it helps to usher in public policy. And so they have anti-protest laws that are going on. People can get killed here in this nation state for protesting. So my concern, to address your question, Joerg, in a rather roundabout way, because if we can talk about religion and labor, but unless we address the challenge of how do we work together in a way that we are not harmed, then all of our strategies are for naught. We have to develop something that supersedes, that overcomes the workings of the power elite. I've seen this too many times in my life, and I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Pamela. This interdependence that you're talking about, I think, is really at the heart of what we're trying to reclaim. There is a negative side to that can become a positive side when you think about interdependence as a system that welds us together involuntarily sometimes, right? That exploits us together, that shapes us in ways that we might not always see. In the labor language, you all know the saying, right? The boss is our best organizer. And it may be worthwhile to think about that side of the equation too. On the one hand, we're interdependent because we're created that way. There's human dignity. We have our common human community. And on the other side, there's something that actually pushes us forward. Because ultimately it is the question of agency. Somebody said we'd have to dismantle Walmart, of course that too, right? But Wall Street in the chat. The question is, who does that? Who can do that? And so this is how we come together. We have two final statements, maybe 2 or 3 minutes each. Let me go to KB next.
So I might get emotional sharing this, but for the first 6 months of the pandemic, I was organizing healthcare workers at the VA hospital. And we didn't have a single week where we lost a union leader or a member of the union or a family member for no reason. And at the same time that this was happening, Jeff Bezos makes $152,000 every minute of his life. And those first 4 months of the pandemic, when we didn't know what was happening, people were being lost, and billionaires were making record profits, it's just never felt so clear that we have a system that does not value people's lives. And 4 months into the pandemic, also in my neighborhood in West Philadelphia, Walter Wallace was killed having a mental health crisis by a police officer. The ways that Black and brown lives are devalued in our country are so numerous, from the toxic schools in Philly that are filled with lead poisoning, to cops being sent instead of healthcare workers, to all of the lives that were lost for the pandemic. I just can't, it feels so unbelievably urgent right now that we do things differently, and that faith and labor partner together in a serious way, in a transformative way, to build power and to win. And people are starving for meaning right now. Coming out in this moment in particular, people are starving to make sense of what is happening. I talk to healthcare workers every day saying, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Why did this happen? And people need meaning, in the labor movement, and our faith institutions are the place they're going to go to for it. And if we continue to do what Pamela has been calling out, keep these things siloed and keep this dichotomy, then we cede religion to the right wing, because they're really good at it. They're really good at making meaning and creating a holistic worldview for people. I just remember in rural, and I'm speaking right now about my tradition I'm from, and especially the white church, that in rural Pennsylvania, people would say, you know, I'm just trying to keep what's sacred to me, and Black and brown people want to take that from me. That's the worldview being preached from the pulpit in that place. So it has never felt more important in this moment that faith and labor come together, that labor actually is centering racial justice in a real way, not just saying it, but really transforming the way that they're organizing. And that in faith organizing, we're going out and doing new organizing and having those hard conversations with rural churches, with the churches that don't agree with us. And what does it look like to actually be organizing and winning people over to our side? And I don't know if I have an answer here, except to say that it feels incredibly important to do this. And I'll just end with the you know, what Chaumtoli was saying about in interfaith organizing, how much Christian hegemony shows up. If folks have heard of the Awood Center in Minneapolis, there are these kind of beacons of hope and light of faith and labor partnering in a serious way, where the labor movement has put their money behind it, their word, and seeded a worker center for East African workers that are majority Muslim. Like, this is what I think it can look like, and it has to look like moving forward. So I hope we can get there.
Thank you, KB. It's amazing to take it all in, because the stories and the actual on the ground experiences that you're reminding us of are so real and are happening at every moment. We have one more statement here by Francisco Garcia, and then 2 announcements at the end. So if you have an extra minute, please stay with us. Listen to the announcements. The announcement about the upcoming sessions have already been made in the chat, so you can see them there. So Francisco, let me turn the microphone back to you.
Yeah, I'll be really quick, because I know we're out of time. It's so great to be with everyone. And as I close, I'm just thinking about the rich traditions that we do have within all of our faith traditions. to draw upon how to make meaning out of this moment and how to give people a sense of belonging and a sense of hope to do this work for the long haul. As KB mentioned, you know, the labor movement and related social movements have sort of strategies and tactics and methodologies for doing the work. You know, and so if we really bring these things together, we can truly, you know, if we bring a labor consciousness, you know, a class consciousness, and an intersectional understanding of our identities into our life of faith, we can build some real power. We can build some understanding and bridge a lot of these gaps. So we can lift upon these traditions and do this really great work. And also that from the faith side, to know that, you know, religion is not limited to the walls of our sanctuaries, our temples, mosques, and churches, but, you know, popular religiosity has always been present. You know, in my own Latinx tradition, that's certainly true. The question is how do we tap into that and make it liberative, make it transformative? And there are many examples of where that's happened, you know, in the farm worker struggle, in justice for janitors, and you know, in Memphis with the sanitation workers, you know, in 1968. So many stories of struggle where faith and labor have been intimately connected. And I think we just have to continue to learn from that and to continue to build power from the bottom up, from the grassroots, with attention to all of God's people. So thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. That is a wonderful closing statement. Let me remind everyone, even though the time is up, I want to make sure we have a minute to thank the panelists, because what they were talking about was not just ideas and theories, but deeply grounded in practical struggles. And this is what gives me hope, because we're not trying to reinvent something that doesn't exist now, because there was a strong religion and labor movement 100 years ago that faded. Things are coming back. We've heard about CLU in LA. There are other organizations around the country. At the Wendland-Cook program in religion and justice at Vanderbilt, we're trying to reclaim some of this heritage in theological education, working with the unions, working with worker cooperatives. Check us out at religionandjustice.org. And there's one more announcement I have saved until the end. Among us is Joe McCartan, who is the director of the Kalmanovitz Institute, who has put on the conference. And Joe has spearheaded a new religion labor organization. I just want to make sure that Joe has a minute to mention it to everybody.
Thank you so much, Joerg, and thank you for your leadership in helping bring this panel together. And thank you, panelists. This was such a moving discussion. You know, it's been incredible for me to be able to listen to this. These are the kind of discussions we're beginning to have in the organization Joerg mentioned, the Interreligious Network for Worker Solidarity. Love to welcome you into it. So if you're interested in joining us for this, please just reach out and let us know. We'll let you know about our next meeting. We're in fact meeting next Wednesday on Cinco de Mayo at noon Eastern time, and would welcome anybody here into that discussion. Thank you again, Joerg, and for all of you for sharing this great panel.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks to all the panelists. There's a lot more to be done, but I know that we're in this together. Thanks for all the people who joined us, visited us. Stay connected, and there's going to be more soon. For now, enjoy May Day. Happy May Day, and goodbye.